So this afternoon we're going to change a little and we're going to first now talk about compliance instead of product testing. And so we've assembled a panel for compliance and then we're going to wrap up and talk about sustainability and chemical management in our last session. So 2 more sessions of the day and 1 more probably really nice break in between so you guys can have more coffee this week. So I'm going to let Avidas go ahead and introduce himself and his panel and we'll move on.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll echo Gary's sentiment and hope everyone had a good lunch. You know, all the jokes about how it's the hardest thing to do is to go right after lunch. Everyone's had so much to eat and you got to fight hard to keep them awake. Now, I won't go into all those jokes, but I will say that anybody who puts together these events knows you always put the most interesting panel right after lunch. Right? Now, I'm not saying we're the most interesting panel. I'm just saying we're who they've put after lunch. So you guys figure that out. So who are we? We've got 3 speakers up here for you. I'm Avedi Seferian, the president and CEO of RAP. Pierre Nicolas Disser, the sales director of Asia Inspection, and Colin Brown, vice president and managing director of Asia Sourcing VF Asia. We're here to talk to you about compliance in the wake of tragedy. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to take about 10 minutes each. I'm going to sort of put down the groundwork for what we're going to cover, what the compliance trends have been in the wake of a whole bunch of recent tragedies in Bangladesh and other places. And then Pierre will talk a little bit about what they're seeing this has come to mean for what's changing at the factory level. And then Colin will wrap things up by talking about what he's seeing this means is changing at the buyer level, the brand level. So hopefully this will give you a nice overview of the whole arc. And we'll make sure we'll save room at the end for Q&A. Hopefully, again, there'll be some good questions for us to have some discussion around. So, to start off with, as I said, my name is Avedi Seferian. I'm the president and CEO of RAP. RAP is Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production. We're a social compliance certification and education organization. I'm not going to talk to you more about my company. If you're interested to learn more, we have a little tabletop just outside. We'd be happy to answer your questions about what we do in more detail there. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about compliance, just a brief evolution of social compliance in the past decade and a half, although Spencer Fung kind of did that for me in the morning already. I wish he had told me he was going to. But again, just to talk a little about what's happened and the buzzword that he mentioned and that we've heard time and time again, sustainability, and what exactly is it? And more importantly, from our point of view, from a discussion point of view, why do these things matter? Why should we care as business people, as sourcing people, as manufacturers, as brands? And then, the second part of our topic, in the wake of tragedy, I'll talk just briefly about what some of the current challenges are that we're facing in this world, and take a quick look at some headlines to sort of set the stage for what these challenges are like these days, and then hand off to Pierre, who will talk to you about the factory scenario, followed by Colin, who will talk about the brand and buyer scenario. All right. So the evolution of social compliance. We've all sort of familiarized ourselves with the tale, as Spencer talked about it, evolving how the sort of sourcing patterns changed from the 50s, 60s, moving towards Asia, really picking up in the 80s and 90s. And then in the mid to late 1990s, we started to see a lot of exposés, a lot of hidden camera work, a lot of front page articles on the Washington Post and New York Times and news magazines like 60 Minutes, essentially revealing some horrible working conditions in some of these outsourced manufacturing facilities in Central America at first, and then in Asia. And what that really led to was a whole bunch of hand-wringing on the part of folks who realized, hey, now that we've moved away from essentially making stuff in factories that we own, and we've moved away to this outsourcing model, we've also given away some control. We've given away an ability to know exactly what's going on in our supply chain. So how do we know that some of these factories that we're seeing exposed on 60 Minutes and the like aren't representative of conditions in our supply chain? So brands and retailers started putting together what we now call corporate codes of conduct. And we all know what some of these things cover. And in order to give meaning to that, they started doing social audits. And that's where this industry emerged. You're sending people into factories in your supply chain to check whether or not they're following your codes of conduct and trying to ensure legal, ethical, and humane working conditions. What has happened since then, from the mid-90s to what was essentially a code that you had to comply with or you weren't allowed to do business, comply or die, to today is an evolution from that initial comply or die model to more about conversations now about sustainability, about continuous improvement, about working together, about partnership, ultimately trying to get to a sustainable way of doing things. Which leads me to ask the question, well, what is sustainability? We've heard this word mentioned multiple times, and I can tell you, in a room full of 110 people, if we asked the question of each one of us, we would get 110 different answers. Most of the time, when you try to define sustainability, you end up trying to put it in some sort of context. What is a sustainable business model? What is a sustainable product testing plan so you don't have to destroy 100 hockey sticks? Right? In all of these contexts, they have meaning, obviously, and sustainability can be very specific. But I'd like to look at the big picture. I'd like to come up with some kind of definition that I can use across the board, regardless of what specific context it is that I'm trying to put sustainability into. And with that in mind, my definition of choice is the following. Sustainability is being able to do whatever it is that we're doing now, whether it's trying to come up with a testing plan or a sourcing plan or a business plan, whatever it is that we're doing now, we should be able to do that without endangering the ability of future generations to likewise do the same. It's as simple as that. If whatever it is that you're doing in a way that will not make it possible for the next generation to continue to be able to do that, then it's not sustainable. It's that simple. So, now that we know what social compliance and sustainability are, the question is, why do they matter? Now, the obvious answer is doing the right thing. Right? The moral case for social compliance and the moral case for sustainable practices is an obvious one, and I'm not going to bother to repeat it. But if that's not enough for you, if that is by itself not a sufficient impetus, then look at it this way. It comes down to protecting your company. Sustainability and social compliance are ultimately business imperatives, not just social imperatives. Social compliance, Tex mentioned this, comes down to risk management. You're trying to make sure you're doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing, but also because if you don't, you're not going to be able to stay in business. You're not going to be able to sell that product. You're not going to be able to continue to keep that business going, and that is a huge risk. So risk management as a business imperative underlying social compliance. And sustainability fundamentally comes down to business continuity. If you can't keep doing whatever it is you're doing, then you're basically running yourself out of business. So you've got to be able to make sure your practices are sustainable so you can continue to have those practices, so you can continue to be in business. So if doing the right thing is not good enough for you, sustainability and compliance matter nonetheless, purely from a business perspective, because they come down to ensuring that you protect your company from a risk management point of view and a business continuity point of view. All right, so having said all that, what is it about the environment today that puts all these things into particularly sharp relief? What are the current challenges in the world that make this so imperative? It comes down to really modern technology. We live today in a global instant communication world where everything is transparent, again, as a word used several times before. There's nowhere to hide. Whatever happens, whether it's in China or in Bangladesh or anywhere else in the world for that matter, it's going to appear on CNN or BBC within a matter of minutes, hours at the most. And if it's bad news, even faster. Right? While this poor Ethiopian co-pilot was hijacking his plane yesterday, we were all seeing it on CNN while it was happening. Okay. There's nowhere to hide anymore. Everything is 24/7. So what that means is reputation and supply chain management, those business imperatives we talked about, are now global 24/7 issues. And the stakes have never been higher in terms of competition, in terms of alternative choices, in terms of having nowhere to hide. And that is where we come to this in the wake of tragedy part of the panel. And I'm going to sort of set up the next couple of speakers just by taking a quick look at some recent headlines to remind everyone how much coverage these things received, how international, how immediate they were. We all remember the Ali Enterprises fire back in September of 2012. You've got massive headlines on New York Times, on the BBC. Tazreen was already mentioned a couple of times today. Again, the New York Times, CNN, massive headlines splattered across, accompanied by pictures, accompanied by strong media coverage. Smart garments, about a year ago, again, the Reuters, ABC, you've got big headlines, you've got pictures like this making the rounds around the world. People see this and they react, as you can imagine, you're reacting now, viscerally. These are very negative, very evocative, and extremely urgent pictures. And of course, the big one, Rana Plaza. New York Times, ABC Australia, AP, the coverage of this thing was incredible. In fact, between Rana Plaza on April 24th, 2013, all the way till the end of July of last year, there was a front page item about Bangladesh on either the New York Times or the Washington Post every single day. Every single day for more than 3 months, there was something on either one of those two papers, and it was not a nice story. I do not know of any other non-war situation that has received this kind of coverage in such mainstream media. And even today, these echoes are heard on New York Times, on BBC, on CNN, on PBS. And it's not just Bangladesh, by the way. I wanted to make sure that I acknowledge the fact that it isn't simply Bangladesh where this is happening. We had a deadly collapse in Cambodia in May of last year that got a lot of attention as well. New York Times, The Independent covered it. We had a factory fire in Italy in December of last year. Teresa Mota was again covered by the New York Times, by Asia One. So it's not simply Bangladesh. It is the issue that has captured the attention of the media, and they're going to point fingers anywhere that the opportunity is presented. So, in summary, sustainability and social compliance are becoming increasingly important aspects of the supply chain management function that we perform today, with today's global value chain operating in an instant communication media environment. 24/7, the news channels never stop. There's nowhere to hide. There's no time to wait for it to happen and then react to it. You've got to be proactive in dealing with these things. And what that means is there's now much more for all the players involved in the supply chain to have to do, whether it's an independent certification program like RAP, or whether it is the buyers and the manufacturers themselves. And with that perfect setup, I'm going to turn over to folks to talk to you a little bit about the manufacturers and the buyer side, starting with my friend Pierre, who will tell us a little bit about what they know is changing on the factory scene. Thank you very much. Oh, and we'll have questions at the end of the panel, so please save them for then. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I didn't know I was supposed to speak, at the panel just after the lunch. I hope it's going to be interesting. We'll see. So quickly, my name is Pierre-Nicolas Disser. I've been living in Hong Kong for the last 7 years, working at Asia Inspection as sales director. I just want to give you a quick background about Asia Inspection. Not that I want to sell anything, but so you understand where the figures come from. We provide quality product inspection services and audit program services for brands, retailers, or importers all over the world. And last year we did like a bit more than 80,000 inspection and audit for 3,500 clients in 116 different countries. So the data that I will show you later on are based on what we found, last year. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because we talked about that quite a lot already. But indeed, 2013 has been tragic year for the manufacturing countries in Asia, but not only in Asia. So, of course, we've got the Bangladesh case, China case. Just one more figure is that the US Department of Labor stated that in 2013, almost 78 million children were engaged in child labor only in Asia. So, tragic year. Have we seen some changes, following those events in the way our clients deal with social compliance, but also product inspection? That's what I'm going to go through now. If the answer was no, I guess I would not be there, right? So the answer is yes, we saw some changes. First, in terms of location, of course, China remained like the biggest country for us. But just to give you a figure, 2 years ago, it was almost 90% of our operation were in China, and last year it was less than 78%. So it still remains the #1 country, but it's going down in terms of percentage. So the first thing that we can see following what happened in Bangladesh is a big push in terms of social compliance audit. In Bangladesh with plus 47%. But what is very interesting is that it's not only in Bangladesh, it's everywhere actually. And so following, if we can say that there is one positive thing, with this Bangladesh case, is that a lot of clients, realized that they needed to take care of that, not only in Bangladesh, but everywhere. So, you see some countries like such India or Cambodia is more than 100% growth. In terms of product inspection, in the last 5 years, Bangladesh has been always the fastest growing country for us. It was always more than 100%, always. And last year, for the first time, it's only plus 34%. So I meet a lot of clients, prospects, small importers, medium importers, large one, retailers, brand. And that is true that they want to de-risk their operation in Bangladesh. So they were looking for alternative. Moving to Cambodia, moving to Vietnam, then to Africa. We've got a big push in Africa, in Lesotho, Swaziland, Ethiopia. So definitely following this dramatic, tragic year, we can see some changes. If you agree, I will come back with the compliance core a bit later on. So what we can say is that fear and awareness drive social compliance. What happened last year gave a really big push. Some people talk already about transparency. The question was, is it going to come like in 2015, 2016, 2017? I think it's going to be this year. Transparency starts now. And then major brands, already such as H&M, has already published, their entire supplier list. That's going to be part, I think, of their communication, marketing. And for example, we are working with many retailers who are themselves working with direct suppliers, but also local suppliers or agents. And they used to run, a social compliance audit program. But it was very difficult, to get access to the final factory. The local suppliers, the agent, they didn't want to provide those information. Now it's time for transparency. And we've got some clients that they stop working with the local supplier who doesn't want to share the factory database. Done. So I'm not saying, of course, that the brands, the retailers, the main importers, they've been running social compliance program only since last year. Of course not. Major brands and retailers, they are working, they are doing such kind of program, for years and years and years already. But we still saw some changes. They step back a little bit and they say, okay, what can we do better? And maybe I can share 3 examples with you guys. The first one is that we've got some clients, who used to do social audit once every 2 or 3 years, depending on the grading of their suppliers. Last year, they decided to change and to do it yearly. Even one client decided to do it twice a year. So they keep doing what they used to do, but with higher frequency. The second example that I can share with you is that we've got more and more requests, demand, for should we do an announced audit or unannounced audit? Before, it was 99% announced audit. But then now we've got more and more requests. What about doing like an audit program but unannounced? So this is one of the changes, because they want to have the clear picture. And when you do like an announced audit, you might not know everything. So the main challenge is that we go there as a third-party company, we knock on the door, we introduce ourselves, we are coming to do this audit for this client, and they might refuse. So the brand, the retailers, they have to be very strong, that no way. They know that within the next 6 weeks, they will have an unannounced audit, and they have to open the door. And one interesting story is that once, we arrive in the factory, and we say, look, we are Asian inspection, we are going to do this audit for these retailers, and then in the following second, the auditor could hear like a very loud music everywhere in the factory, That was a signal. Hey, guys, an auditor is coming. Hide something. So it's pretty interesting. The last change that we saw for those clients who used to run audit program, especially for the main retailers and brand, they've got sourcing team, they've got quality team, and then they've got the social compliance team. They don't work together because of sometimes maybe you could get some conflict of interest. Following this case in Bangladesh, some brands or retailers, they said that they didn't even know that they had some production running in this particular factory. They didn't know that. Is it true or not? I don't know, but that's what they said. So what is important is that they are doing this audit program, but how can they make sure that the production at the end will be done in this factory that has been audited? So more and more, we do this audit program and then inspection program. And during the inspection, we need to cross-check this information to make sure that this production has been done in the factory that we're supposed to be audited. So this is a new trend, that we see following those changes. So as I said, fear and awareness drive social compliance, but I still meet a lot of prospect clients who are always looking to cut cost. So they are trying to source somewhere else. Within China, of course, we see a big shift, within China, but also outside of China, 7 years ago when I arrived, I was meeting importers and they were telling me, I source exclusively from China. Now it's not the case anymore. It's at least China plus one country, at least. But the problem, is to save cost. But now the question is, at what cost? Maybe at the cost of the social compliance. Because if you see the score, here, if you rank out of 10, when you do a social audit in those countries or in those provinces, you see that there are some huge discrepancy, plus or minus 25%. So now the question really is, they need to find the balance, between saving cost and going to those very risky countries, or keep being advanced, with their social compliance program. And I guess the challenge is to find like a good mix for everybody. That's it. Thank you.
I think it'll be easier if I hold it, because otherwise I'm going to be. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm just seeing if you're still all awake. I first moved to Asia in 1988. Yeah, I know, I was child labor at the time, but... and when I first moved to Asia, I was working in Hong Kong, and I used to come into Hong Kong on a Monday morning, and I'd get my faxes, and then I'd rush to that China ferry terminal, and I'd get on one of those old ferries. I'm not sure if you remember them. They had the big rubber around the front, and you'd bomb away into China. And then I'd disappear into China for the week. No mobile phones. no email. Nobody could find me for the entire week. And at the end of the week, on Friday, I'd come up with samples. And I was a hero. Everything was great. And the knowledge that I had in those days was I knew where the factories were. And that's all I really needed to know in those days, where the factories were. What actually happened in them? Well, as long as the samples came out, it was okay. Our industry has changed dramatically, and Spencer and the rest of the guys have spoke to that this morning. But I think the one thing I've seen is that this industry is starting to coalesce. We're reaching a point where there really are no secrets anymore with regards to where we're sourcing. My job title says sourcing. I'm a sourcing guy. When did I last go out and source new factories? I can't remember when I last did that. It was years ago. I don't do that anymore. We all kind of know where the factories were. We all kind of know where the factories are, sorry. So the key for us is really starting to realize that together, as a group, as an industry, we're stronger. And that's kind of what the toy industry learned a few years ago, and I think that's kind of one of the things that we're starting to kind of understand. And in addition to my title of Vice President and Managing Director of VF Asia, I'm also the Chairman of the Apparel and Footwear Committee for AmCham. And one of the reasons I accepted the opportunity to chair that committee was because of the tragedy in Bangladesh. Because it dawned on me that now is the time when we as an industry can start to coalesce and start to work together to try and address some of these challenges. But what about VF? Well, first of all, let me kind of show you what VF's sourcing footprint looks like. One of the things which surprises a lot of people about VF is we actually manufacture around about 22% of our product in Mexico. And we have a big manufacturing center in Central South America. One of the reasons for that is, unlike many of our competitors, we own a lot of our own factories. We manufacture about 30% of what we sell, we manufacture ourselves. But we still source about 70% of that. We source around about $3.5 billion worth of goods. And obviously Bangladesh is an important part of that. So when the situation happened last year in Bangladesh, we had to think really hard what our response would be. And we committed to support and stick with Bangladesh. We genuinely believe that we have a responsibility to the workers in Bangladesh, and we have a responsibility for the workers that work in all of our factories, not just in Bangladesh, but also in the countries that we have yet to go to. So we have a responsibility to put in place a robust program both to protect those workers in Bangladesh and our current workers, but also as an industry put in place processes and procedures which protect those workers going forward. So we at VF, we put in place a few different bits and pieces. The first thing that we agreed was we were going to have an active participation in the alliance. And I'll talk to that in a little bit more detail later, but we're one of the founding members of the alliance, and we sincerely believe that this is a great opportunity and a great forum for us to kind of move these things forward. We've also been going through a process of going through structural and compliance audits, and this is something which we've always kind of done because we've always had a compliance group on the ground. We've also put in place manufacturing and engineering groups. I'm not going to talk about all of these. We also have put in place financial assistance and a program through which we can help our vendors, certainly in Bangladesh and other countries, start to invest in some of the challenges they have in order to fix their business. And we also are continuing to move forward with something called third way initiatives, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail at the moment. I'm not going to talk about the alliance in great detail because I'm not a member of the board, and I'm not a first-hand representative of it. But the alliance is basically a group of 26 companies, and VF was one of the founding members of that. Again, I'm not going to read through this, but the mission of the alliance was to focus on workers' participation, to focus on structural inspections, electrical inspections, and fire and safety training for workers. And this is something which VF is very active in and been very supportive in setting up. There's been a lot of progress to date. One of the things that I'm really pleased with as being part of the Alliance is the progress that actually has been made in inspecting factories. I believe our intention is to have all of the factories, and I think there's 700-ish factories with about 1.2 million workers, approximately. And our plan is to have all those factories inspected and completed by the middle of the year, July time. I know from a VF point of view, we have around about 90 factories, and we believe we'll pretty much have them inspected to a standard which has been agreed by the Alliance hopefully by the end of May. And we can then start to put in place programs in which we can drive improvements within those vendors. A lot of work happening on worker training and empowerment, and actually starting to engage on a local level with the workers. There's also a program in place within the Alliance to start to provide an element of financial help to vendors that need to make those improvements as well. And there's a lot of work happening on transparency and sharing as well. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but if you want to find out what's happening, there's a website which is bangladeshworkerssafety.org, and I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that, because that continually updates the progress that the Alliance is making. We at VF have also put in place our own kind of processes and standards that also align very closely with the Alliance. We're insisting that factories must have one owner per building. I'm not going to read through all of these for you, but we've put in place a fairly robust program to make sure that this type of situation hopefully doesn't happen again. One of the other initiatives which is a little bit different for VF is that we have something called Third Way. And this is something which I think is perhaps a good example of how our industry is starting to change. Because one of the things with VF is we have our own vendors, we have our own factories. And so within our own factories, we have a huge amount of experience with regards to managing factories. So how do we take that expertise that we have, the facilities engineering teams we have, the internal manufacturing teams we have, work with them and the vendors that have local knowledge on the ground of how to operate, and then apply our sourcing expertise against that. So working through how we integrate what we do with the vendor is becoming increasingly important. And this is something which we believe this integration of sourcing and supply is going to become increasingly important. And that's one of the reasons why I'm optimistic that we're all moving broadly in the right direction. As I said earlier, I think we are kind of heading towards, for want of a better way of putting it, the twilight of sourcing. I think sourcing as we know it has kind of changed. We're no longer charging around trying to find new vendors. The solution which the markets dictate, which our consumers dictate, are certainly much more transparent. But it also requires that we have a much more integrated relationship with those vendors. If we're going to be able to manage the lead times that are required, if we're going to be able to manage to the cost levels that are required, if we're going to be able to manage to a global consumer base, we can no longer be taking and hawking our business around multiple different suppliers. We have to have much closer, much more integrated relationship with fewer suppliers. And this is something which we've been really driving towards and focusing with VF. And also, as we said, there's no secrets anymore. We all talked about the transparency. There really is no secrets. We all pretty much know what's going on. And what I would ask you to do is kind of join with us as an industry as we start to move forward with a lot of these bits and pieces. Andre used this earlier, but I do believe that we're heading towards a spirit of cooperation, where we as an industry can start to cooperate, but still be a little bit in competition with each other. It's okay from the point of view of your supply chain can be more efficient, your design can be better, but let's make sure as an industry we start to coalesce around supporting each other in these specific initiatives. So thank you very much.
All right. Questions?
After lunch.
Yeah, the after lunch stupor here. There's a couple of hands back there.
Hi, I'm Esther Nicolas. Talking about auditing, what's the best way to tackle bribery and corruption in your view?
That's an easy question, isn't it? That is one of the bigger challenges that the audit industry is facing. Certainly any of the audit companies here, as you know, RAP can tell you, and the brands and buyers themselves, I know several examples of brands that have had that challenge within their own internal audit team, and it is a reality that we face. I think at the end of the day, there are some basic measures to take, which, if you do it right, should start from before you even hire people. Vetting, having appropriate vetting processes in place up front is going to be crucial to make sure that you don't hire somebody who was let go by somebody else for precisely that problem, for example. So making sure you have good hiring processes, you have the right kind of background checks to begin with, so you save yourself from that end as one on the front end. But then as you go through your own staff, or as audit firms will tell you, they put in place some interesting processes like mystery audits. There'll be somebody within the organization whose job it is to go in and do audits after their team has gone in to try and see what they were up to. Internal follow-ups of that sense. Some have gone so far as to try and essentially test their auditors by setting up scenarios where the factory managers are told to try and offer a red pocket or a bribe and see how they react. In addition to that, of course, you also have good practices along the lines of internal reinforcement, regular ethics training, reminders of what to do. One of the challenges that an auditor faces is, if you're in an audit by yourself, and the manager's in the room with you, there's only two of you, they're making you an offer, what are you supposed to do then? If it's not clear to you, if you're afraid of what happens if I accept or don't accept, it becomes a he said, she said. We've had a few occasions where an auditor will say a factory tried to bribe them, and then when we investigate, the factory says, oh, no, the auditor asked for it. So if you end up creating these kind of situations where they are afraid for what to do, it's a problem. So if you create a strong policy internally where you say, look, here is a cell phone number. As soon as this thing happens, you take a picture, you text it to this number, you call right away, make clear to them what they're supposed to do exactly, you end up putting yourself in a much better position so they know what to do and they're not left wondering one way or the other. In the end, it is, unfortunately, human nature. The best efforts will probably still lead some folks to succumb to temptation, and in those cases, moving swiftly, proper investigation, termination, sending an example for others is ultimately what the final step will be in that process to make sure that the message is loud and clear. This sort of behavior is unacceptable. From a RAP perspective, if we encounter these, the consequences are felt not only at the auditor level, but also at the organization level, because they have a responsibility to maintain proper practices within their auditors as well. Pierre, anything to add to that? I know you have experience in this too.
Yeah, what I used to say, of course, is that bribery is a national sport in China. Everybody knows that, but not only in China, and it's not only for third-party companies such as Asia Inspection. Even in your own team, you can get this issue. So, of course, check the checker. This is important. Before recruiting the guy, of course, but then we try at least to audit every auditors at least twice a month. So we arrive in the factory, around 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. and we double check everything. So they all know that they can be audited at any time. So it helps for sure. We reward the auditors that report bribery issues. So we use money to fight against bribe. It works. We've got something that is I believe, really powerful with the main clients and main clients is that we run what we call supplier workshop. So we rent a room, sometimes South China and then North China or Bangladesh, and in the same room you've got the client, Asia inspection, and the suppliers. And we talk about everything openly, including bribe. And we've got, the suppliers and Asia inspection, we've got the same interest. We've got the same client. We want to satisfy this common client, right? So if we are talking about transparency, but we need to share, with the suppliers, your philosophy that you, in terms of retailers, brand, that you cannot accept anything, that if anything happens, they should call this 24-hour hotline. Because, this is a big game also. Nobody is telling anything. Then you receive like a failed audit report. So you complain, with your factory, and then pop up this story. Yeah, it's because I didn't want to pay the auditors. No way, if it happened, you should have called the hotline straight away. And the last thing, for a company is to have, believe a zero tolerance policy. And I'm gonna give you just one example. 1 year ago, we hired a new operation manager, and part of the integration process, everybody, whatever they are, from the IT department, accounting, anywhere, they have to perform 2 inspections. We need to go to the factory and to perform inspection. And where does it start, bribery? Where does it start? And we learn that this operation manager, you've got a lunch with the suppliers, and the supplier pay for the lunch. We are talking only about a few RMB, right? But then we send a strong signal to the company. This guy has been dismissed immediately, and an email has been sent to everybody, including the inspectors, auditors, that because of that, we decided to fire the guy. And of course, when you recruit such an operation manager, it takes time, you spend a lot of money. So we lost a lot of money, but zero tolerance policy, and you need to send strong signal.
I'll just say, have clear standards and expectations, have a really good communication plan with regards to what's acceptable and what isn't, and communicate it, so make sure there's no ambiguity. Have a process through which you audit the auditors to make sure it's all okay, and if it's not okay, make sure you have a robust feedback loop so that you can actually, collect the information. Other than that, I don't think there's much more we can do.
Thank you. If you've got the magic solution, please share with us.
I think this is another amazing panel, and we also show our international diversity with this panel as well. So thank you for all your efforts on this. We're going to move to our next panel now. One of our speakers just arrived, and so I'm giving him at least 3 minutes to brief. And we'll go ahead and get set up with the next panel. So thank you to this. So I want to introduce David Kircher. David and I met last year in Salt Lake City at the Outdoor Industry Association event, and we were doing some planning. I've been working with the Oecotex team in the U.S. For a few years, and David and I were brainstorming on a lot of different ideas, but we're glad to welcome him as a moderator to this panel, and he'll go ahead and introduce the other 2 folks. And we're going to now dig into greening our supply chain and moving into that sustainability, and then we'll wrap up with chemical management for the day. So David?
Thanks, Gary. I know that I will have a hard time with you because it's after lunch. You have to listen to my freaky German English. I definitely hope you get used to it. And Certainly last but not least, we had a very nice panel before, which was very interesting as well. So we hope that we can not top, but make it at least interesting as well. So we have kind of a different panel compared to the other ones. So I will make something like 10 minutes of introduction, and then we start with a more active panel. So I'm going to ask interesting questions to my two colleagues. So we are a little bit more focused on, let's say, strategy, innovation, and trends in sustainability. And we actually want to involve you a little bit. So if you have comments later on for these interesting questions, we would ask during the panel if you have any comments on this as well. So let's introduce myself. My name is David. I work for the Oecotex Association for nearly 2 years. I have an MBA in General Management and a degree in Textile Engineering. So my work is based for almost 17 years in the textile industry. So I have quite a lot of experience in textile manufacturing, in textile machinery, consulting, and sustainability as well. So I kindly ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. Philip or whoever?
I'm Philip Young. I'm currently the Executive Director of CETA, a Clothing Industries Training Authority. Before joining the authority, I was a teacher, teaching in the university, teaching in the Polytechnic University in the areas of textiles and fashion.
Thank you.
I'm Anderson Wei from Sustainable Fashion Business Consortium. We are a nonprofit group set up in 2008 and been involved in a lot of funded projects with government and been involved in areas such as in carbon footprint, in water footprint, and we've been also involved in the creation of Higg Index.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and help me to figure out good solutions for our topic, greening the supply chain. Let's introduce Oecotex a little bit first. As we are an international association, we have 15 member institutes based in Europe and Japan. We have more than 65 representative offices around the world. So we are a very global-based company. To introduce 3 of our products, while we have certainly a bit more than these 3, most probably the Standard 100 is very well known by the most of you in here. So it's a standard which is an independent testing and certification system for textile, raw, intermediate, and end products. Second product that we offer to the market is STEP, which stands for Sustainable Textile Production. This is more about certifying production sites if they're doing their business sustainably. And last but not least, we have the Standard 100 Plus, which is a combination between those 2 products I introduced. So it's a product label which stands for safe product and sustainably produced. The Oecotex itself has issued in the last 20 years more than 120,000 certificates. It decreased more than 10% every year, so the awareness in the market is very high for our Standard 100 product. We already have quite a lot of certificates for STEP, which was only launched last year in summer. It was probably 1st of July last year. The distribution of our certificates, as you can imagine, it's 60% in the Asian countries and the rest completely all around the world, while we still have quite a lot of business in Europe for Oecotex standard certificates. Our partners around the world, as you may see over here, our focus or our customer focus is mainly on garments that have skin contact. So it's in children and baby wear, underwear, and related garments. So let's start with a little bit more interesting part. Enough from Oecotex, enough from me. Start with our part of greening the supply chain. People say you can tell the latest color trends in fashion by looking at the shade of the rivers in China. Each season dyes get dumped into waterways after they are circulated through poorly operated textile mills, leaving a string of hazardous chemicals in their wake. So, companies today are being held accountable for environmental problems created by their suppliers. The press is quick to link companies who deal with environmental unfriendly companies, especially if a tragedy occurs. Can your company afford that type of exposure? Many companies are performing environmental audits and implementing rules of conduct to check the actions of their suppliers. And my question would be, what are you doing? So, the globalization of the textile industry has created enormous pressure for textile brands, factories, and suppliers to demonstrate their ability to manage continuously improve the sustainability of their products and the production sites. Major retail brands in all sectors in the textile industry have been indicated by several stakeholders for a lack of focus on sustainability issues. Worse, in many cases, they have been singled out as being a significant contributor of environmental pollution or having not sufficient social recognition, not enough occupational safety and health protection for workers, and lacking in the control and the ability to manage global supply chains. Stakeholders want a greater accountability and transparency as the industry moves towards the common goal of being more sustainable. Coming to the definition of greening the supply chain. For the definition of greening the supply chains, you can find also quite a lot of different definitions. So I just picked up one, that a green sustainable supply chain can be defined as a process of using environmental friendly inputs, as well as technology that is sustainable and environmental friendly. But it's not only the environmental aspect, it's also that the whole idea of a sustainable supply chain is to reduce cost while helping the environment. The World Bank reports that 80 countries now have water shortages that threaten health and economies, while 40% of the world, more than 2 billion people, have no access to clean water and sanitation. So, such concerns should point out one common vision of everybody in this room, of everybody who is working in the textile supply chain. So, protecting the environment. The solution that we need to consider can be found in these three parts. We have to recognize, as mentioned in the panel before, the social aspects. We have to take care about our environment. And certainly last but not least, we should not forget the business part. So it's still all about money in this business. So if we can figure out the right balance between those three factors, we are sure that sustainability pays off at the end for everybody. So let's start with the more active part of the panel. Sweatshops in Italy. A fire broke out in a Tuscany garment factory at the end of last year. 7 Chinese workers died during this tragedy. The media reported all around the world. So as we have here before, so it almost 5 minutes later we can see the headlines in CNN and BBC, whatever. So it is completely clear that the transparency on what happens globally is omnipresent. But what does it mean at the end? So, is this the end of an ignorant consumer? Or is this just like having a little bit PR and things in the media? So, is that true? And what could be influence our daily business? This would be my first question to my colleague. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's fair for us to call our consumer ignorant, because frankly speaking, we are probably not doing our part to begin with. But it is better to understand their needs and to understand what they want to be called and allowing consumers to identify themselves. But nevertheless, it is extremely important for us to reach global transparency, because transparency is our language to consumer, and that is lacking at the moment. Having transparency within the supply chain helps with driving improvement process initiatives that will provide a platform to compare and to illustrate the urgency for transparency. So we can collaborate to resolve issues such as running out of non-renewable resources, water usage, the use of harmful chemicals, and ultimately reducing the amount of impact to the environment. We need clear labels at the consumer level to provide adequate transparency, so we won't be overwhelmed with a lot of greenwashing products that are perhaps poorly designed along with the responsible manufacturing process. What we need also is top management support from brands, so that they can help to drive these changes, and even at the government level, we should have more policies imposed to help with engaging the supply chain into a greater future.
Thank you. What about you, Philip?
Yes, I do agree that global transparency is now really with us. Look at the reports published by Greenpeace, for example. All right, Greenpeace uses very, very smart tactics to push the brands that they really have to do something about the vendors. And in a way, that is why all the brands now have agreed that by 2020 they're going to have a zero discharge policy. Now that is something that Greenpeace is like many NGOs, they are doing their part, right, pushing the brands, really alerting the consumers about what the brands can do with their suppliers. But on another hand, I would think consumers also need to be educated in a way. I think by looking at the life cycle analysis of Levi's, right, done that famous report on their jeans 501, that in fact, if you look at the life cycle analysis, the major culprit of energy use is not the manufacturing part, but rather on the user part. I'm sure a lot of you know about it, right? Especially if the consumers, they're going to wash their products in hot water using tumble dry instead of line drying, and so on and so forth. That is something that maybe we need to educate the consumers. So as a whole, right, looking at the whole supply chain, not just the manufacturing part, but also on the consumer side, that they also need to do something in order to make sure that these free liquids do, right, what they was just use the economy, the environment, as well as the social part, right, need to be balanced, right, in order for a chair to stand firmly, that these three parts must be totally equal, right, to make it stand very firmly. So when we look at the total in totality, the compliance side, right? We talked a lot about compliance earlier in today's conference. And the environment part, right, of course, is important, but also on the economy side, whether by doing the social part and the environment part, still leave rooms for the vendors, for the manufacturers to be sustainable. I think it is also one area that needs to be addressed very carefully.
Thank you. I completely agree to both of your statements, and I just remembered one statement of Kitty from VF this morning, that we need something like one brand or one label, a hang tag, which has its function of information, and this information should be true, as everybody will figure out if you're telling some untrue stories to the consumer. So Are there any other comments regarding this topic from the audience? Does anybody wants to give his comment on this headline at the end of the ignorant consumer?
I think I concur also with what Anderson said, is that we also, the recurring theme is we have a responsibility to educate. So, we can't just say you were ignorant because, but really we've made you ignorant because we have not provided that level of visibility on the consumer basis. It's a great question.
Okay. Moving to our next interesting question, if we talk about the base of criteria to measure what we are doing, we basically talk about a global consistency, or at least that is what we want to have. The answer for this is very easy, because it will reduce complexity, it will reduce work, it will allow us to make benchmarks in the future, and it's all about credibility and so on. So the common ground of all these key factors undergird the economical aspect of sustainability as well. So how do you see these points, and probably what could be done better in the future, and who is able to change global criteria or to set global criteria? Philip?
Perhaps Anderson could elaborate more on why we established SFBC in the first place, right? SFBC, in fact, was established, what, four years ago, right? Yeah, four years ago. Predominantly, the founding members are manufacturers, and those manufacturers, in fact, are doing really their production in a very responsible manner in terms of both the compliance, right, the social part, as well as the environment part. And that is why we want to form this consortium, so the members can share the experience to other manufacturers, so that by stating to them that by doing in a sustainable manner, in fact, economically, it is also viable, right? Especially if you look at the very initial stage of doing some environmental projects, right? Like changing the lighting and so on. The return of investment is almost immediate, right? Just after a few months, you will have to return, right? And I'm sure a lot of you may have the experience to that. So by it is only the long-term projects or the bigger projects that need more investment. Really, you need to investigate much more. One of the members, for example, has done a lot of work, right? And so, in fact, last year, my understanding is quite a number of members of SFBC are doing extremely well. They are doing like double-digit growth in their business, right? One of the reasons when I asked them was that because they are doing their production in such a sustainable manner, that the buyers have confidence in them, especially because of publications by Greenpeace, and also, as the first question stated, the world is so transparent now. So they really want to make sure that their production, which are done by a company or by factories that are doing in a very sustainable manner. And so in the long term, that we really want to advocate that by doing your production in a sustainable manner, it will have an improvement on the economic side, and to make sure that this free liquid stool can stand very firmly. And in a way, we also advocate. Well, if we look at quality in the first instance, that I'm sure a lot of you remember that in the early 1980s, that the famous guru Philip Crosby advocates that quality is free. Right? By a lot of us as skepticism at that stage, why we want to say that quality, well, we can't say quality is free. We have to invest a lot of resources in order to make sure the quality is up to standard. But once we know about this zero defects concept, by doing the things in the right place, in a right manner, in the first place, quality is, in fact, can be free. And if you think along the same line, sustainability, can sustainability be also free? I will leave this open, all right, and let you just consider. Can we do that? I'm sure, maybe, right? I'm sure, not maybe, I'm sure that in a few years' time, when we come back, we will say that sustainability is also free.
Well, there are a few points I would like to add to Philip's point. First off, we were just talking about transparency, and again, it is the language that we can provide to the consumer. And but how do we do that? In the case of SFBC, we follow one of the principles that's been commonly practiced in the industry under the GSCP Global Social Compliance Program, where we look at things at 3 different levels. First level is called awareness level. Second level is called proactive management, and the third level would be leading practice. Not everyone are at the same pace. So for those that are not really out there and understand what exactly people are doing in sustainability, they can increase their awareness level. For those that are doing proactive management, perhaps they can start doing reporting, they can look at their targets, they can benchmark themselves among their peers. And then for SFBC members, we start off with a number of manufacturers trying to do best practice sharing, and that's very unique. And in fact, that helps us to guide us into more knowledge, more hunger for more thirst for knowledge. And in the end, we have completed a number of initiatives. For example, the low carbon manufacturing program, a activity-based carbon footprint project. And then we have also been helping a lot of work with the Higg Index. But at a global level, the industry had 39% of the industry by revenue has agreed to agreeing to one standard, which is the Higg Index. It is a self-assessment tool that helps to evaluate the environmental performance of the facility, the brand, and the product, again in 3 different levels. So if you're comfortable with answering certain questions, you can answer your level 1 questions. If you're more advanced, you can go into your level 2 and level 3 respectively. And each of them start out with primary questions, just basically yes or no. Have you done it or you not? But when you go to secondary questions, they go deeper. And then on level 2 questions, they basically ask, okay, if you had a target, did you meet your target? What are the improvement process and what are you going to do with them? So those are all really in line with a lot of the 2020 vision and target lines. So this is why this has become one of the tools that the industry has agreed on, because it is a language that we can share, we can talk, and again, it is all about transparency.
Thank you. Moving over, well, sure. Sorry? Well, I think we decided not to make a single presentation, but proceed with the questions. All right? Is that okay? I lost my track, Gary. Okay. Sustainable production. A recent research managed by the Kellogg School of Management shows, like today, also in the near future, cost and quality are still major decisions for buying activities, certainly. But less important are still taxes, environmental protection, and innovation. This is a statement made by the Kellogg School of Management from the United States. So the question is now, so who pays for sustainable efforts today and tomorrow? Very interesting question.
Well, as I said earlier, right? My philosophy is really sustainability is free, so nobody pays for it. I'm not sure whether I answered the question, but Well, quality. Who pays for quality? If I ask you, who pays for quality? It should be the same, right? Now, I'm sure everyone of now accept that quality is free, right? Quality is a given, right? Without quality, I'm sure your company will fold, right? In a few years' time, I'm sure it will be the same, right? Without sustainability, your company will fold. So this will become an investment that you cannot do away with. So if it's part of your production cost, so in a way that you have to pay for it, all right, within your production cost. And so I would still advocate that sustainability is free.
Probably if we place this question for today, I'm quite sure a lot of brands and retailers would not say that sustainability is for free, as they have to invest quite a lot of money. So
that of course is debatable, and I welcome. Sure. Right, I welcome any comments and it will be. I would really like to hear from you what you think about this concept, right? I am quite confident that having quality as an analogy, right? I'm quite confident that sustainability will be an issue that don't need any further debate. And every company, not just the manufacturing, right? All the brands, all retailers, right? And all companies, in fact, they need to be working in a sustainable manner.
Well, first off, I believe that manufacturers are responsible for their own self-assessment and self-improvement over time. As we all know, the market has been quite volatile. Cost of raw material went up so much. People need to move to other region, and there are a lot of concern with currency issue, also with lack of resources and so forth. So, in order to survive, most manufacturers need to evaluate on their own, and they need to find ways to survive and to sustain. So, but in fact, most of the sustainable efforts do have a quick return on investment if you choose to do them. For example, on machineries, a number of our members have put a lot of investment on the machineries, and most of them save an easy 12,000 tons of carbon to something close to 1.2 million savings on carbon within only 9 months to 12 months. And that is also the 9 months to 10 months is when they have the return on the investment. So it is a pretty good initiative where they get to educate their various departments, for example, to prove it to the top management that these are even more viable cost reduction process, not only just sustainable, but something that's totally viable. At the same time, some of the marketing team, or if they have a sustainable team, they can put this on their GR report. There are a lot of ways to do improvement, and so putting all these effort, together, helps not only with gaining your competitive edge against those that are not doing it, but in terms of sharing costs, this is something I believe is between brands and retailers, because the margins between the brands and the retailers is just a lot more flexible than it is for the supply chain. In the supply chain, most people are living on very thin margin, and can they really bear the cost? I think if you really look at how many factories has run out of business in the past 2-3 years, that's the proof that we cannot afford it. So, but the only thing we can afford is to become more knowledgeable and to be more competitive, and that can be done by self-assessment, self-improvement, reporting, and benchmark, and to work closer with the brands. And I think going back to the Higg Index again, the past 7 years that we've been involved in this collaboration. That puts us a lot closer to the brands, not only at the design level, but with the entire team, the operation level, the compliance level, and all those people. That's how you can resolve problem. You know, it is very difficult to resolve problem and so single-handedly. That's what people say all the time. But I don't think there's one party that can pay for everything. And I don't think the consumer is ready to pay for something 30% more. But maybe the brands. I don't know.
Okay.
In fact, the development of Hay Index also, in this morning, right, we talked about using a standard, right, one standard for all. Well, Hay Index, in fact, is a drive, right, from so many brands getting together, try to form one common standard for the environment issues in sustainability. I think that is a very good initiative, and I do hope that in terms of sustainability or the environment part, the facility part of the sustainability, that could be just one standard. So that will save a lot of cost for the manufacturers.
Thank you. I move straight over to the next, probably the last question, which is going a little bit further than only saying, well, the Higg index could be the one standard and things like this. Still, the Higg index is struggling with different problems, as you may know. So this goes directly over to the question, what is sufficient enough self-declaration, or do we need, well, let's say not 100%, but do we need validation on site to have real approved data to be sure or assured that everything is fine with us?
Okay. Well, Hay Index is now in the second version 2. But still, I think what Hay Index really wants to advocate is a self-improvement tool at this stage, right? So all the brands and the manufacturers, they need to complete the questionnaire really based on their own knowledge and use that as a guide for their own improvement, all right? And SAC has just also is currently developing the validation process, right? And so whether it will be a third-party audit or a second-party or even the first-party audit, I think it is still up to consideration. But as Anderson is a member of the board, I think Anderson can share more light on the development of this issue. Anderson.
Yes, well, I believe that both self-declaration and validation are both equally important. In fact, they both go hand in hand. Self-declaration could be done through sustainability reporting at a corporate level, with reports like GRI report, because it is the choice of the company to choose what kind of data they would like to be reporting and how they go about with setting certain targets. For example, 5% improvement each year on their carbon footprint or water usage, or trying to substitute more chemicals that they're using. So you need to start with the self-declaration, and you find you need an avenue to report it. That's how you can communicate within the company. If you have 20 partners in your company, or 40 or 60, you need that. You need that to be able to benchmark yourself on where you are. But and then you can go into something more like pledging, or trying to set more target on your 2020 plan to see whether you can complete certain things within a certain time period. And you can also do an intermediate review by, say, 2015, 2016, just to report on the progress on that. And then you can also talk about what is needed in order to fill the gaps. So in the case of the supply chain, honestly speaking, most of us are not people that make the raw materials. So validation is definitely something useful, because at the end of the day,
we need to know what we're buying. If we don't know what we're buying and where the BD is excluded or come from, there's no way we can really have full transparency. So I would say maybe 80% of us in the supply chain need to do some self-assessment first. And then and of course the self-assessment, your insurance company can also be validated. But in terms of the exact data, do we all need to do our own health year report? Most of them take about 18 to 9 months. And I think at this stage of the environment, the economic environment, we may not be able to afford that. We may not have the resources to do that. But starting off with self-reporting and then at least knowing where exactly your sources are, talk to your suppliers, they might be able to help you with providing a lot more transparency. And then moving forward, then we can go into more validation. In the 90s, most of us have, if you walk into any manufacturer's or company's group in their office, there's probably about 20 certificates on our table. And that's how we used to do work with validation. But has that really been moving the industry forward with being more sustainable? Not necessarily. There are a lot of really special story behind each of those certificates, but they don't but they also overlap quite often. So it took us 7 years to agree on a set of questions, a set of a benchmark. So in fact, speaking as a board member of the SAC, it is not an easy task to come up with a good validation tool, because the complex between the brand module, the product module, and the facility module, and how we are going to convey that message into a final number, and how is that being evaluated from a metric standpoint is very complicated, and at the same time it's not easy to get everyone to agree on it. It took us 7 years to agree on a tool, and I hope that it will take us much less time to agree to a validation procedure.
Thank you. Looks like there will be an exciting time in front of us. For all of us. Gary, master of the ceremony, how much time we do have left?
We've got time for a few questions from you.
Great, okay.
And it's interesting that we're starting to dig deeper and deeper as we go through the day, and so we see the eyes glazing over. So we're going to have a break before you guys get some sugar before the last session, because we're going to talk about chemicals more and more. We've gone from up here to what seems relatively simple on CPSIA and REACH, and moving into China GE, and then we're moving down now into this, well, where's my raw materials and how can I be sustainable and create longevity? And then are we going to take 7 years to build a tool, or can we do it faster? And how much can we implement and when? So these are all great points that we brought out, that are coming in. So let's take a couple questions before we move to the break. Anyone?
Hi, I was wondering, with the idea of sustainable production, how do you sell that to a vendor or a factory where they are, getting pressures from all sides, margins are increasing, there's pressures on customers, on small orders, more flexible production? I'm thinking what they say in turn, when you sell ID to them.
If the simplest way, for example, if you really want to look at how much carbon dioxide you have generated, right? The simplest way is just look at your annual electricity bill or your fuel charges, right? See whether you can actually reduce it, right? By reducing the electricity charges and the fuel consumption, that means you have contributed to use less energy, or equivalently that you have produced less carbon. It is as simple as that. But of course, then you have to dig into your production. At which stage of your production you're generating most carbon, or at which process that you're doing that can reduce the use of energy. Now, by reducing energy, in fact, it's reducing cost. right? It's straightforward in a way, all right? As I said earlier, for some very simple methods like changing the lights, having good management habits. In fact, the first thing is to change your management habit. Whenever going out of a room, switch off the light, switch off your air conditioning. That saves energy. Whether you need to set your air conditioner at 20 degrees or 25 degrees, all that small things will reduce your cost, right? And that's, in fact, we're helping our Earth, right? Because we are generating less carbon. So at the initial stage, experience told us that it is the management, right, that we really need to look into, and it can cut down our costs. Well, of course, in future, whether you use into very sophisticated ways by having new equipments and so on and so forth, that is the second stage. And that is after you have done your first stage, you convince your people that by working in a sustainable manner can actually help them to reduce their production costs. And I think once they buy in, then you can move on. That's our experience.
Well, and another angle to look at it is perhaps sometimes we look at the cost of electricity and water, we take it for granted. Right? I mean, for most of us, I think our electricity bill and water bill didn't go up in the past few years, at least not at a substantial level. But if you look at the amount of energy and water we still have on Earth, we should be paying 300% of what we are paying today. That's the only way we have the budget to go recover them. So if that is going to happen, it's going to hit everyone in the room. It's going to hit all of your bottom line. But if it takes that much damage or shock for us to do something, that would be too late. I think next year we only have 1/10 of the audience that can still make it to the meeting. So let's not try to go that way. So in fact, what could be done is maybe perhaps I can use one example. At the past fiscal year, members that have been involved in the low carbon manufacturing program, we are still making, after the program been around for 5 years, okay, we still managed to improve our carbon saving by an extra 37,000 ton. And actually what that translates to in numbers, if you were to pay for that electricity bill in Hong Kong, that would be $60 million. And that's a whole lot of money. So, and did all these people pay that much internally to complete the effort to participate in the LCMP program for 1 extra year? No, we did not pay all that much. But the savings was actually already there. So consider the fact that the cost of water and electricity may go up, maybe not at 300%, but let's say 30-40%. That is already painful enough for us to do something. But are we ready for that? Probably not. So we have to be proactive. It's not even a choice. It is an action that we should be doing just to understand what we're doing. Those are risks, basically.
And once again, we are seeing change happening. So a few years ago, Thomas and I were talking about sustainable manufacturing and saying, well, is the consumer really going to pay for a product because it has a green label, it's more sustainable? And that's the question, but we're seeing the tide changing and the consumer saying, yes, I do want to care about the earth that we live in, so maybe I will. But I think my takeaway is that when I go home, I'm going to brush my teeth and shut the water off.
Exactly.
And so I'll do my part, and then if we all can start doing our parts, and as manufacturers and brands, if we work with our factories and say, let's make incremental changes, and then allow that to build, and then let's continue to audit and validate throughout the course of our production, eventually we're going to get to a good place. All right. So thank you to our panel. Give them a hand, please. And we can move to our final
break for some refreshments and sugar, and we'll have reconvene at 3:20, and then we'll have our final chemical management speech. Products that we're delivering to our consumers. And Marc Desaulniers is here. Marc's from Brown Shoe, one of our customers, and Marc is the Director of Wholesale Planning and Operations. And you know, when I was putting together the agenda and looking for speakers, I talked to people about RSL and chemical management, multi-tier. We've talked so much about all of these things today, and I'll cover that in our recap, my recap. But conflict minerals are a huge issue right now for anyone doing business in the United States. And so many of our customers are still scratching their heads and saying, how far do I go? Where do I go? Where do I start? I did a webinar just a few weeks ago through American Apparel and Footwear Association, AFA, and we had 182 people register for a 1-hour webinar. We had over 150 show up. So we know that there's still issues and concerns with how to manage conflict minerals. And so before Marc starts, I want to talk about how conflict minerals are just one of the challenges that fit into this profile. And so I put together 3 different graphics. We'll start with the California green chemistry. And Marc is going to talk about that also. But this is a new state-level law that you may or may not have heard about. Marc will talk about it in detail, and we can give you additional information. American Apparel and Footwear Association, for those of you who aren't familiar with them, we're closely related to them as a trade association as well as Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. And on AFA website, you can find a lot of information. It's wewear.org, wewear.org, wewear. And you can look there. But then I think it was Professor Young mentioned the Greenpeace report and the effect that the NGOs are having on everything. And that graphic right in the middle is from the latest Greenpeace report. If you haven't seen it, you should download it and take a look at it. It's called Monsters in My Closet, and it targets some top name brands and how Greenpeace did some chemical studies on apparel and footwear that is being sold in stores, and how they found chemical levels that exceeded even the brand's threshold acceptable limitations. And the last is also just a graphic that shows that every country that you are attempting to sell and distribute in, and then the state level and the province level in China, can add additional complexity. So there's so many challenges when it comes to chemical management. As a software development delivery company, we are building more and more solutions to help you manage chemicals, and I'm working with almost every one of our partners that you see represented here on how to help you to manage those chemicals more. So I'm going to let Marc come up and talk. He's actually changed these. He's going to talk about green chemistry first and then talk about the conflict minerals management program. So thank you, Marc, for joining us.
Hello, everyone. I just want to give you a little bit of a perspective of Brown Shoe, and you know, we source around 45 million pairs of shoes a year, primarily from China, and we, through our famous footwear division, retail around another 55 million pairs of shoes a year, so around 100 million pairs of shoes. We are sourcing product from around 125 different factories. We have roughly 30 major customers who all have different rules and regulations and standards that are trying to make our life as complicated as possible. We also have 1,000 other different customers who don't have rules and regulations that we sell through. So we're a public company, so we have to adhere to U.S. government standards, and there are many rules and requirements. So it's very complex. And I'm going to add a little bit more complexity when I talk about the California green chemistry. But then as we get into conflict minerals, I'll show you where we ended up on conflict minerals and how we decided to handle it. And we think it's a fairly simplistic approach that is very effective. So that's, in a nutshell, what I tend to do. California green chemistry is also known as the Safer Consumer Products Act. It's a brand new law that California has introduced. And this law is effective October 1st. You probably haven't heard much about it. And basically, it has these broad goals from California's perspective. So they're dictating what are chemicals of concern, things that they're worried about, and then they're going to ask their suppliers to talk about what are safer alternatives. Can you switch something out? Can you change? What are the substitutes? So it's a brand new frontier. Not only are they talking about here are chemicals you can no longer use, but they're going to ask you what are the alternatives? How do you manage those alternatives? So life gets even more complicated, unfortunately, as this law gets rolled out. The scope is all products sold, offered for sale in the state of California. You can see foods, pesticides, medical devices are excluded. Unfortunately, toys, apparel, footwear are included. So that's the bad news. Unfortunately, also, California is a huge consumer market. It's the 12th largest market in the world. So whatever California does, we have to pay attention to. And secondly, California is also, their laws tend to get adopted and rolled out to other countries and other states as time goes on. So they're a leader in the trends that they follow. So we think that the impact of this will expand well beyond the scope of California. What is also extremely difficult is when we manufacture products or buy products or sell products to our customers, we're not selling products just to the state of California. We're having a particular shoe made, and it would have widespread distribution through all 52 states in the United States and Europe. And so this one state forces you to adopt a law that needs to be administered for the entire production run of a particular product. So very complicated. And we moved, we got one slide there out of whack. We made a last minute switch in the slide sequence. Okay. No, right there. Yeah. Hold on a minute, sorry. So what are some provisions of this law? They're going to establish a list of chemicals, and initially this list includes about 1,200 chemicals that the state of California is considering. They haven't released what they're focusing on. They're going to designate what they call priority chemicals, chemicals that are of the greatest concern, and those are the ones that they're going to be challenging initially, questioning us as suppliers in terms of what are the alternatives, what can be done. They're going to ask suppliers to perform this alternative assessment. What could you do differently? We're concerned about a particular chemical. What are the options? What are the choices? All of this is going to happen starting very soon. They're going to impose conditions in terms of the administration of those chemicals. So this is a new frontier. This is beyond the scope of Prop 65. So Prop 65 was the initial thrust into this chemical management endeavor in California. This is taking it to much more detailed levels, unfortunately. So the next steps are, there's a list coming from California by April 1st. They've targeted that to release their initial list. They're going to identify priority products that they're concerned about initially, and hopefully apparel and footwear isn't on that list to start with. And these are the things that look like they may be on the list. So nail polish, toluene, and formaldehyde, which actually is used in tanning sometimes, and fluorescent lights, mercury. Those are the chemicals that appear that they're going to be addressing initially, but we really don't know that for sure yet. That's going to be published very, very soon. So the businesses that are going to be challenged by California in terms of the identified chemicals are going to have to scramble quickly to address those concerns and to report back and to challenge whether alternatives are acceptable or not. So there's nothing that you can do today except understand that there are quite a few questions and quite a few regulations that are coming our way very, very soon. Okay, so it's similar to Prop 65. Unfortunately, the rules are not finalized. It will take some time to sort out the regulations. One of the big interesting things to me about Prop 65 is, you have a chemical that's on the Prop 65 list, cadmium, let's say. How do you administer that? Is that suggesting that every purchase order is tested? Or is that suggesting every style is tested? Or is that suggesting every batch of material is tested? Or do you have to do audits? What level of control do you need to exert to manage that particular chemical and to satisfy California? In the footwear industry, when we start talking about that among ourselves through FDRA, you find different companies have wildly different approaches. And, the FDRA is going to be trying to reach a consensus for an industry as to how tightly each one of these is managed to give some order to the process, because it is a grab bag today and everyone's doing it differently. So very, very confusing, unfortunately. This obviously could have a big impact on product design. If mercury can't be in fluorescent lights anymore, how do you make fluorescent lights? I don't know how you do that, but that's going to be a big challenge to that industry, I would imagine. We imagine there's going to be winners and losers in this. There's some companies who are going to figure a way to prosper on this and set up consulting or set up alternative supplies or set up, I think about, like in shoeboxes, you have the ink suppliers who have all moved to soy-based inks. Well, that was all done as a result of initiatives to get rid of the solvents in the inks. So the soy-based ink suppliers have prospered. The people who are making the old solvent-based inks have not prospered. You're going to have the same sort of effect here, we believe. And again, as I talked about, your risk in terms of managing this. How do you manage these chemicals, and to what degree do you test, and how do you feel confident that you are managing it responsibly without overspending is another complication there. So the whole business of restricted substance lists and your lab verification techniques, if you don't understand how that's working now, I would suggest you want to start understanding how that's working, because it's going to get more involved shortly. So there's your slide again. Yeah. So are we done?
I just keep popping up everywhere. I don't know. We'll find
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
we've got it. I think you keep hitting the end button.
Okay, my bad. My mistake.
Down, so
Okay. Okay, my bad.
Good there.
Okay.
Okay. So, Mark, if you don't mind me interjecting, before you move to talk about chemical complex minerals, I've been working with both FDRA and AAFA in discussing this, because the initial legislation came out with so many question marks. Well, in April, we're going to tell you what 5 product categories are coming down to be listed. We're sensing through the legislation that children's products will be listed. At a minimum, if any of you techs are making a water bottle, Chris, you guys are probably going to be targeted because anything that could go into the mouth is a dead giveaway for California, just knowing how they are. And so we think children's products and possibly anything that, water bottles, things along those lines. You also have to think about children's products that might go into the mouth. So here we are with the zipper again, right? So I mean, as a kid, I stood at the bus stop and chewed on my zipper for I don't know how many days, and I don't know what happened. But we're okay. The other thing is that with both the conflict minerals and with California green chemistry, there's no monetary or legal repercussions to the brand. So we sit and scratch our heads and say, well, okay, so they're telling us we have to report, or they're telling us that we need to post on the California website that we have these chemicals in our products, and here we have some alternatives, and we're going to try and scrub our supply chain to eliminate them or to replace them. But I think that your biggest threat is going to come from your consumers and your NGOs. And I think they're the first ones that are going to come after you guys, and I think California is going to almost give them a platform to do this. They're going to say, listen, so-and-so brand has formaldehyde evident at high levels within their baby pacifiers, and so let's not just boycott them, but let's also start some national campaign. And that's where your biggest threat is going to come. And brand image is something that you can't pay for and that you need to protect. And everyone in this room probably realizes that's the hardest thing for you to protect. So when we're talking about these new laws and legislation, the governments are smart because they're used to you guys saying, okay, well, I'll just get a couple lawyers and I'll cover the legal fine. Here's $1 million, pay that fine, and I don't have to change my supply chain. Now they're going to get the consumers and the NGOs after you guys, and they're going to say, well, they're going to do more harm than we could with a single $1 million fine, and that could be crippling for a brand or a retailer. So this is what we really need to protect against.
Okay.
So let's talk about conflict.
So let me add 2 other points, though, to that. I mean, one is, again, we have 30 different big customers, 30 different rules. They're all going to ask us the same question 30 different ways. And we have to satisfy that and manage that in a sane manner. Plus, the offices of our company want us to manage this responsibly, too. So, we got to keep those guys out of jail, right? So it's a challenge, but one that's so the whole California law is going to happen very soon and it'll have a big impact. We can't quite exactly say what it is, but it's happening soon and it'll have a big impact. One that has already happened and is having a big impact is conflict minerals. And people are just starting to realize what conflict minerals is and how they can deal with that. So, how would you like me to page down here? So, the conflict minerals is commonly called the USA Dodd-Frank's Consumer Protection Act. It was implemented fairly recently, and it's effective now, and all United States companies need to report on conflict minerals with their annual reports starting May 31st. So companies are starting to realize that they know the answers to this question that is going to have to be filed with their annual report. It's kind of like doing your tax returns in the United States. All of a sudden you realize there's questions you have to answer in doing your tax return, and it's now the last minute. So now is the last minute, and that's why all these people are on this seminar that Gary talked about. The goal of conflict minerals is for the consumers to be aware of the situation with conflict minerals and that these minerals are being used in Africa to finance armed conflict. So it's a very noble goal. It's sort of like blood diamonds were a while ago, but it is a U.S. law that is being managed to. Who has to deal with this? So all USA companies, any company that's based in the United States that files an annual report in the United States, and it deals with product that is sold anywhere in the world. So if we make product that for brown shoe that we sell to Europe, then it falls under the Conflict Minerals Act. So it's a very encompassing law. And private companies, fortunately for them, are not in scope. However, if they are getting involved with financing bonds, any interaction with the Security and Exchange Commission in the United States will trigger them to get involved with conflict mineral reporting. So it's very complicated. So the challenges in conflict minerals are there's some terminology that is very nebulous in the law. The first piece of terminology is this term called de minimis. And what that means is any trace amount, any tiny little amount, the smallest 1 part per million identified of a conflict mineral, and now you have a conflict mineral. That's crazy, but that's the way the law works. Also, the question becomes, is the mineral necessary to the functionality of the product? So, is a buckle on a shoe necessary for the functionality if it's decorative or not? The consumer would probably say it's necessary. So, is it necessary to the production of the particular to the item? So, if you have a zipper on a boot, that would be considered necessary. And then another word that is really confusing is how do you do a reasonable country of origin inquiry? What does the word reasonable mean? How good is reasonable? Very, very nebulous terminology, but that's what they've left us with at this time. And then in terms of managing reasonableness, it's you as a supplier or us as a SEC reporting company must report on doing due diligence based on a recognized framework. What does that mean? Our interpretation is it's having a procedure, having a policy, having a technique to manage due diligence. But again, very nebulous terminology. So the law has very nebulous terminology, yet on the other hand it says if you have 1 part per million of tin in your product, you now have a conflict mineral that you have to manage. It's a little bit crazy, I personally think. But however, we'll talk about how to manage this. Another challenge is mapping the supply chain is difficult. Who understands who their congratulations for understanding who your tier 2 suppliers are. I would say that the majority of the people in the footwear industry have no idea. Tier 3 suppliers are they're a mystery. Very, very complicated to trace back because in terms of tracing, they are actually asking on conflict minerals to trace back to the mine where the ore came from. How do you do that? Extremely complicated. And plus, another big problem is that if you have a buckle in a shoe, will oftentimes have multiple suppliers making that particular buckle. It's not like an iPhone where you maybe have 2 suppliers making the case and they crank out millions or tens of millions. We may have 10 different people supplying a particular buckle. Whoops, I did it again. How do I, do you have another approach? Moving down? Okay, just scroll. Okay. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I will switch to the mouse. Thank you. The intent also is, in conflict minerals, as Gary talked about, is to have companies report this information publicly and then have the public provide the pressure in terms of managing this. So there's no financial liability or financial penalties. However, it is going to be a very public forum where the information is displayed. So a company like Brown Shoe, this information has to be posted on our company website for customers or government organizations or activists or news organizations. All those people can peruse that and use that to leverage that information as best they can. So it's visibility to pressure companies to address conflict minerals correctly. So this ambiguity that we talked about in terms of the rules and the regulations, it causes different approaches. So in footwear, we have basically three different groups. We have our internal corporate reporting, those 45 million pair that we source ourselves and we manage. And we then have external customer expectations. So we have people like Walmart and Macy's and Nordstrom's. Some of those have taken a position on this. Others have not taken a position on this, which is very surprising. Then we have companies that have outsourced their administration to third parties. So people like Target and Kohl's, and someone from Target here today, I believe. They've contracted with a company to do a web-based survey on asking us details about our product and then trying to trace it back all the way to the mine. So very, very complicated. And then other companies like Big Five Sporting Goods just have an internal survey that they've implemented. So what are the conflict minerals? I mentioned tin. In shoes, we have tin, unfortunately. Titanium is not really present in shoes, and I don't think apparel, gold and tungsten are the other of the four conflict minerals. And then these are the countries that the concern is. They're all located in the middle of Africa, and it's basically the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the surrounding countries. So the intent here is to try to make sure that minerals from those countries, those four minerals from those countries, are not making it into the supply chain. So just to give you a perspective, and I stole this from borrowed this from the FDRA, but this is just showing you in a shoe where that mineral might show up. So in a buckle, you might have tin, gold. I really don't think there's many shoes that have gold in there. So in the you could have some sort of reflective coating or glitter on the product itself that might be tin also. In the leather, sometimes there's tin in the tanning process. Eyelets, tin is used as a rust inhibitor, oftentimes, to improve the malleability of an eyelet. Laces, you might have tips on the laces that have metal tips, or that might have tin. In the toe cap, if there was a metal toe cap, you could have tin. And then in the shank, a lot of shoes have a piece of metal inside to provide stability. It's called the shank. It's down at the bottom, and that is often contains tin. So we believe that there's quite a bit of tin basically in shoes today. To a small degree. It's not, shoes are mostly leather or fabric, but to a small degree. But like I said before, the way conflict minerals work, it doesn't matter whether it's a small degree or a large degree. So I wanted to walk you through a little roadmap that we built to understand this regulation. So the first question is, does the company involved file a report in the United States with the Security Exchange Commission? So for Brown Shoe, the answer to that question is yes. So if it's no, it's good news, you don't have to do anything. But if it's yes, then you get into the question, is the product being contracted to manufacture? So if a retailer is telling us how to manufacture the product, then they are contracting with us to manufacture. Now, the way our business works is we control the design of our product. So we believe that we're in control of the design and we do not do contract to manufacturer. However, again, we have 30 different customers, and the way that they interpret the word contract to manufacturer is different. So this is a point of discussion, but Brown Shoe controls the design, the specifications, the quality standards, the testing, all the execution. So we don't believe that this applies to us as an example. So if it's no, you're done with it. But if it's yes, then the question is, and it's yes for us for our internal product. For our internal product that we're manufacturing and selling to the general marketplace, it's yes. So is conflict minerals necessary for the functionality of the product? Is that buckle or is that zipper or is that shank necessary for the functionality of a shoe product? And the answer is yes to that particular question. If it's no, again, you're done. Unfortunately, the answer for us is yes. And so then the next question is, how long ago did conflict minerals enter the supply chain? So this is, everything now is past January 31st, 2013. So that question, the answer is yes. Well, the question's in reverse. It's after that date. So we do have conflict minerals that were after that date. And so then the question is, are the minerals, are the components of the shoes, are they made from new metal or recycled metal? Everyone knows that, right? You understand. I mean, I'm just kidding. I mean, it's not another complicated question. Oh my God. Get rid of this end button. Help me out here again.
It's okay. It escaped for me.
Sorry.
You guys are going to know that little guy.
Hey, thanks. Okay, I'll get it. I got the page down.
So while you're clicking really quick, I just want to add that on my webinar last week or the week prior, we had some folks from KPMG on the line with us, and we were talking about what does this report look like that I need to turn into the SEC, because the SEC said you need to report on it, but they never said what you needed to include. And so, because a third-party audit is required, and so every time Mark says no, that doesn't mean he still needs to report. Even if you've done the due diligence and said, I have no conflict minerals, or everything I use is recycled and not originated during this time frame, you still need to draw up that report and turn it into the SEC, saying I went through steps 1 through 3. So there's action that has to still be taken. There's still a burden on the importer or the sales, whoever's selling in the U.S.
Okay, so, whoops, thought I'd try a different button. That one doesn't work, so I'll go back to here. So the question is, are you using recycled metal or new metal? And so if it's yes, then it's you have to file a report explaining that you are using scrap or recycled metal, and the question is over. If it's not recycled, then you have to do more. And So if it's not recycled, then you get into this whole question of where did the metal come from? What is the country of origin of the metal? And so did it originate from one of those Africa countries we mentioned? If the answer is no, then you're done. Again, if the answer is yes, then there's more questions. So if it's yes, then you're now expected to exercise due diligence, whatever that means. We couldn't quite decide what due diligence was, but you're now expected to do some investigation to understand where it came from. If an investigation that the new metal did not come from a covered country, then you are then you're okay. If you're not, then you have to dig further. So it's very messy and very complicated. So you know, how do you manage this? How do you manage this and stay sane and not drink too much? Is sort of the question that I have. So here's the approach that we've taken and how to manage this complexity. And what we've done is we basically designed a process, a business process. And you know, basically a traditional Six Sigma business process where you have these 5 steps. You basically define a standard, and then you have a technique to measure to a standard, and then you have a way to analyze the information, and then you look at that information and then improve your process, and you execute control over your process. So a very traditional quality assurance, you know, proven technique. So, you know, someone here was talking about Crosby. It used to be called Plan, Do, Check, Act. Now it's called Define, Measure, Analyze, Improve, and Control. So the standard that we've taken as a company is we can't dictate recycled tin, but we advocate the use of a recycled tin. And if new metals are used, we definitely do not allow new metals from any of those problem countries. So that's our direction to our suppliers, to keep it as simple as possible. And so the other point in this, in terms of measurement, is we've implemented the conflict mineral data collection form as part of the shipping document set in EC Vision. And I'll show you a few screenshots of how this works. So the way that our EC Vision process works is we manage shipments and we manage factory payments through EC Vision. So if you do not follow our packing list process and our commercial invoice process, you will not get paid. Very good incentive to have people follow the process. And our accounting group is totally on board with this. It integrates back to our enterprise resource planning system. So all of our commercial invoices come through the EC Vision process, and unless you follow the steps correctly, you will not submit a commercial invoice and you will not get paid. And one of the steps is to submit the conflict mineral information. So we have an incredibly tight bottleneck there. Did we get complaining about this when this started? Yes, from a handful of suppliers, but once they get used to it, it works really good. So this is the way the screen looks in EC Vision, and this particular screen is, let me see here, we have a tab in EC Vision where we basically record the conflict mineral information, and on that tab it automatically populates with a particular product on each purchase order, and then we present our suppliers with a few questions, and these questions cascade. Depending upon your answer, you get the subsequent question. So the first question is, does the product contain metal or not? And so if the product does contain metal, then it asks the supplier, does it contain conflict minerals or not? And then if it does contain conflict minerals, then it asks, what component of the shoe, what particular component of the shoe contains this metal? And then the fourth question is, okay, if it does contain a conflict mineral and you know the component, what is the particular mineral that is in there? And for shoes, it's tin is the mineral that is being used. When we do identify gold, then I go out and buy the shoes at retail and melt it down, and I haven't been able to sell any of that. And then the 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth question is, tell us if this is new or recycled. And then if the sixth question then cascades, if it's new metal, tell us the country of origin. So this is our data collection method. And this data collection method is absolute since February 1st when we implemented it. It has to go through here, and I'll tell you how we manage this information as part of our Six Sigma process. Now, the good news, EC Vision promised me that they would buy me a drink if I said this, but we implemented this very easily and very cost effectively because we were already on this EC Vision module. So basically, we asked them to put this additional tab with this additional questionnaire, and we decided to implement this as we think is an easy way to manage this complicated problem. And, you know, as a wholesaler, we had many companies knocking on our door trying to sell us a wide variety of solutions to this conflict mineral problem. And so there are consultants calling us every day, there are people emailing us, there's webinars on this topic every single day because people want to find a way to generate business to address this, this government initiated requirement. So our technique with EC Vision we think is very cost effective and gets us to where we need to be. So you have all this information here, and this again is an EC Vision screen, and what I wanted to try to show you here was, first of all, you can see that all the information has been populated on this particular row, and if that particular shoe had multiple components with that metal, then there would be multiple rows, you know, one for the eyelet, one for the shank, different components. And then another really good thing about EC Vision is up here, this is their search criteria. So we could do a search any old time we want using that search criteria and delve into that database. So how do we manage that? So we're in the measurement phase of Six Sigma. So just to give you a better perspective, here's, you know, the same screen. There's the search criteria up at the top. Here's the output showing us many records that are being dumped back out. And this is just to give you a little bit of a perspective as to what EC Vision looks like. So, you know, we're in part of the, this is part of visibility. So we've generated a report through our invoices and got an output from that report. So that's the visibility output that we're seeing. So then we simply take that data, download it to a spreadsheet. So we didn't invent some, you know, fancy report. And then out of that spreadsheet, we can analyze the information with just a simple pivot table to see what is going on. And this is a small snapshot of data. And so this is saying for this particular period of time, we had, you know, 1,592 invoices. So 50% of the invoices had no metal in there. And I'll talk about verification of this information in a minute. This is what's reported. And then another 47% said they had metal, but they had no conflict minerals. And so here we are with the 2% that's left, and the 2% that's left is triggering all of this work. So to manage the 2%, we're forced to do this. So we have to understand what particular component, whether it's new or recycled, and then there's additional level of detail in terms of who the suppliers are for the new metals in the country of origin. So, so just to give you a perspective there. So how do you, what we do is we take that information and then we start studying it, and we look how to improve the process. And when we initially did the first data dump of this about, maybe 6 months ago, something like that, you know, we saw people said they were using gold. And I was like, oh my God, how are they using gold? And so there was gold color. And so we had to go back out to our factories and explain what that means, and we had additional training, an additional training session explaining what this rule is and how gold color doesn't mean it's gold. And we also explained recycled and so when we analyze the information, then we put ourselves in a position to do validation audits. So we take a sampling of the information and we start validating and digging in and understanding the accuracy of that information. So, you know, it's sort of like the restricted substances, right? You can't check every single PO. You do a sampling to understand what is going on. So that's what we've chosen to do, is to manage the information and then to do a statistical sampling to validate the accuracy of the information. So then we take that and we use that as feedback into our process, and we make adjustments to our process, and we believe we'll be improving this process as time goes on. So, you know, some people have asked this question a couple of different ways. I heard it 3 or 4 times. Will there be one rule and one interpretation for how to manage conflict minerals or how to manage any of these substances? Unfortunately, my personal belief is everyone interprets this all differently. And so, you know, I was on a committee at Brown Shoe deciding how we were going to manage it. I had 3 lawyers telling me 3 different things. I had 30 customers telling me 30 different things. And we decided on one reasonable approach to manage all this complexity, because you have consultants, you know, all wanting to do things. We had people wanting us to spend over $200,000 a year to manage this one little question. We had people who wanted to have a multi-tiered hierarchy web-based survey that would try to go back to the original, you know, mine. You know, incredible complexity. So how do you take all of these conflicting pieces of information, digest them, and synthesize it into something that's manageable, easy to manage, that you have confidence in? And so we were very fortunate in that we were using the EC Vision commercial invoice process, and so we just supplemented it with a little bit of something that allowed us to manage this easily. So my personal opinion is, even though there are organizations trying to reach consensus on how to manage conflict minerals around the world, I personally don't think that there will ever be consensus. I think it's just going to be complicated, and as an organization you have to figure out how to manage the complexity and simplify it down to something that's manageable. So that's our journey through California green chemistry and conflict minerals, and I personally believe that Again, this is sponsored by EC Vision, this conference, but I think by having this tool and taking the approach that we've taken a very complicated, messy problem, and we have an elegant, reasonable solution to manage it. But that's, you know, that's my personal opinion, so.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. That vote of confidence. Have a seat with you some questions. So, a couple points to also bring out as we wrap up this panel, and then before I move into the recap. Mark did show you some screenshots. One thing that he mentioned is that you're multi-sourcing your raw materials from a range of suppliers, and so we allow you to also manage that, because one supplier may have one of the 3 TGs and need to be declared as a conflict mineral, and another may not. And this then allows you to report and look at your supplier base and say, why aren't we buying our buckles from this guy, and we can eliminate having to do all of this further due diligence. And so does conflict minerals require that you then not multi-source is not true, but it's eventually going to lead there. Further, we're hearing from the EU, from the European Union, that they are looking at a similar type of law, that they want to include other either conflict minerals in this same type of law, that you need to make a declaration, whether it be on conflict minerals from DRC or surrounding regions, or even looking at the Uzbeki cotton situation and what's happening in Uzbekistan. And so we're going to see more and more of this happen, and that's why taking a proactive stance is really important. So we have some mics out on the floor. Yes, ma'am. Someone bring this set. Are we have a microphone?
Yes, a couple of questions. I thought that AAFA was going to release some tools to train suppliers. And the second is, how do you verify the information that suppliers fill in, because they might not know?
Yeah, it was interesting that David and Anderson and Professor Young talked about whether self-validation is sufficient, self-declaration versus validation, and what is a sufficient level. And if you turn to your suppliers and say, are you using conflict minerals? Not me, no, sure. But you need to validate, because ultimately you're responsible. And so there's going to be a level, and that's the definition of due diligence that the law lacks, and what Mark brought out. The law that says you need to do the due diligence, and what is that level of due diligence? How do we get there? AFA is doing some additional training on conflict minerals. They have something scheduled in Asia, so I'd encourage you to look at that, as well as FDRA if you're working in the footwear industry. Mark also mentioned, he showed us some points on a boot, which is interesting because it looks like it's a military boot. And in apparel, there seems to be even more ambiguity, so I love the use of your term ambiguity, as to what needs to be included. We need to think about embellishments. And so there's still a lot of back and forth with the legislators in the United States to say, well, if I have a sweater that's a snowman sweater for Christmas and it's got little sparkly eyes, we've got this, it has one of the 3 TGs that's in it, and the 3 TGs are found to be from the DRC, then do I need to declare, And so how far down do we need to go to our N tier, and how far down within our product lines? So there's still a lot we're scratching our heads. This is going to be the first year of reporting. Brands that we're talking to are saying, let's see how far we need to go in this first year and see if it's going to withstand. Other questions? It was interesting because on the webinar that I did last week, we did start with some polling questions to ask how many brands are aware of are aware of the conflict minerals rule, what's happening in their own supply chain, and if they even have a clue. And about 54% are still scratching their heads on what to do with conflict minerals, and now we've got California green chemistry going to come smacking you in the tail again. So again, taking a proactive stance is really important. What Brown Shoe has done is a great start. Will they probably need to go to another level? It's entirely possible, given that we are adding more and more chemicals that you need to monitor in your supply chain. So if there are no more questions, then I'm going to move into my recap. Anyone else want to talk about California green chemistry or conflict minerals? All right, so this morning, you know what, I have 5 keywords or phrases that were brought out throughout the day. And the first is change and evolve. And we started this morning with Spencer Fong saying that, change is the heart of Hong Kong. And as a man growing up in Hong Kong, he has seen that change and how the factories have changed, and this evolution for compliance and sustainability has become integral and important to the industry, and how we all need to change. And that word will continue as I'm going to go through each presentation, and almost every presenter used the word change. The other term is responsibility. And Li and Fong said that we are being responsible, and who are we being responsible to? We're being responsible to ourselves and our world and our consumers and our factories and the workers in those factories. And so that's another term that was a recurring theme throughout the day. The next one is transparency. We heard that every panel, and it's funny because I put these panels together of people that came from all different parts of the world and different industries and different businesses, and everyone had these same terms that just kept reappearing. And transparency was another that just kept coming up. Tex told us about the need for transparency, and then we hear from Kitty talking about that, and we're talking about transparency of chemicals, but we're also talking about transparency into the social and ethical compliance aspect of our business. And then the last, I think, would be common standard. And for the years that I've been in this industry as well, everyone says we're going to establish a common standard. The Higg Index is the new common standard. And that's what we're going to use for sustainability. And that would be great if we could all have this common standard. Do we have a core set of ethical standards? RAP has theirs, and then someone else is going to go out with theirs, and then they're going to say, well, I'll take a RAP certificate in addition to 5 other questions. And this is what keeps happening. And CPSC is doing the same thing to us. It's, one of the amazing terms that I think the U.S. government has come out with in the last few years is Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. Tell me what's improved with the act. I don't know. A consumer might say, yes, things have improved, but from our point of the industry, I don't know how much improvement we've seen. So these words were recurring throughout the day in the evolution of what we're doing, and how sustainability continues to be a pillar of not just Li and Feng, but every company that's here, and everyone that's here is concerned about that. And then Fabrice and Andre and Tex all talked about evolving again, and how REACH is going to still evolve. And then I just mentioned that now the EU wants to get on board with this conflict mineral. So change, again, is happening. And you need to engage proactively in order to lose your business and your customer base, or to jeopardize your brand against risk. And Kitty and the folks from China talked about the need for enterprise-wide change, and that you need to include your marketing teams and think about, well, how am I labeling this product, and where's my warranty card, and what does that have, and there's all this cross-functional involvement that needs to happen. So again, we're talking about process change at this point within your organization, saying, where are we going next? What can we do to make sure that we're not getting in trouble? Then after lunch, a different type of change, and that's tragic change, were the words that I remember most, in that we've evolved into an industry of fear and awareness. And that's what's driving the numbers up. That Pierre showed us that these numbers are going up, and the number of audits that were done in Bangladesh just in the last 12 months alone has increased. But what's happened in China? The numbers are still the same probably, but we've got this key awareness and fear that everybody's looking at what we're doing in Bangladesh. And so we're going to audit the heck out of Bangladesh, but we're still going to do the same old thing in China and not be so concerned about our factories in China. So, you know, it's a different kind of change that we're looking at, and that's driven by something else. And then transparency and the geopolitical shifts in China. So we're moving from one region in China to another, and what does that cause to what we need to do? And then the China Plus One, I thought, is a great term, because Sourcing Journal is a document I read almost every day, online publication. I would advocate you take a look at it if you don't. You know, Vietnam is on the up and up as far as production. And so this is this the plus one, or who is the plus one? And when we move to this plus one, what's going to happen to the way we do business? And we're committed to change, is something that Colin mentioned, and taking, because of this responsibility to the industry, its workers, its customers, and the world. And this is the twilight of sourcing, was a term that Colin used in his presentation. So we think about Hong Kong being what it was hundreds of years ago, and where Spencer started us in the morning, and after lunch we're talking about a twilight of sourcing that's still happening. And then David and the group talked about how we can become more sustainable and the greening of our supply chain, and we had transparency again. We're looking at raw materials, and we're getting even more transparent and educating our consumers, because we're responsible for their ignorance, and we need to make a change and affect the way we produce sustainably. And this will lead to consumer confidence. Anderson said those words, that the only way we can gain consumer confidence back and not have them coming after us for every little thing and saying, well, you know, we really don't trust you. We have to wear your apparel and your shoes. We don't trust you, so we're going to have our watchdogs coming after you at every moment. And so we need to take responsibility, again, for educating the consumer. And then there's that common standard for sustainability, which was mentioned. And then last, Mark talked about transparency to our end-tier suppliers. So now we're looking at something that goes so far deep that we need to find out what mine the nickel plating came from, or any of the 3 TGs, tin, tantalum, and gold are found in our supply chain. And so this is that transparency we need down all the way to the lowest level that's barely achievable. So really, and then again, the self-validation process, you know, and using the OECD process of looking at our supply chain. So recurring themes all throughout the day, really again, change, transparency, responsibility, and my first page is back here, and the common standard are things that I think are key takeaways that we should remember throughout the day. So any other questions or comments? We have a few minutes before we close.
First of all, any comments, remaining comments or questions? I know it's been a long day. Thank you all. Thank you, Mark, by the way, for such insightful things. I learned a whole lot about contact minerals. Thank you, and thank you all for all the speakers, all the panelists, and being able to come here and give us your insight. Of course, I know this is the first time we are actually doing this SourceTrends event. And do fill out, you know, if I know there are comment sheets, do give us your your feedback. I know that the space is a little cramped because originally we were going to have round tables, and because of the the level of response had been better than we expected, we have to change this setting. But hopefully you sit comfortably throughout the day. Hopefully you had a good lunch. But do give us feedback in terms of the topics, in terms of what you can do. We really want to continue on these kind of events where we can engage the people, the experts in the industry, and our partners and our customers and anybody who really want to have a dialogue around subjects. And we also are looking for a topic next year. We may probably stay on this topic. We may. It depends on the responses from So any information you can share with us about what you think would be the sourcing trends or supply chain trends, or actually Colin's saying that we should stop using the word sourcing, so maybe we shouldn't use sourcing, but that's been the word for years, so I don't know if I can stop that. But basically, whatever trends that you think would be a topic where you would like to learn more or hear more about, we welcome any suggestions you have. We try to be very open about what all the speakers and most of our panelists are all pretty open about it too. So I thank you all for spending the whole day here. It's 4:30. I know it's a very long day. Appreciate many of you staying that long, and hopefully I'll see you all next year. Also, by the way, I would like to thank my team because we kind of did this with just pulling it together. We didn't do this as a money-making thing of just say, oh, why don't we just do an event? And my team put a very good effort. So I'd like to thank the whole organizing team and all of you and all the panelists. So let's give everybody a round of applause. So thank you all, and hope to see you all next year. We don't know about any of you, but see you all. Thanks.
We're with Spencer Fung, the Group COO from Li & Fung Limited. And Spencer, thank you for keynoting our conference today. It was really important for you to be here because of so many initiatives that Li & Fung is undertaking, and especially as a leader in the industry. You mentioned in your keynote that evolution was really important to our industry and to where we're moving. So can you talk further about how the industry has evolved already and where you think we're moving forward with sourcing trends?
Right. Do I need to do this?
Sure.
Yeah. As I mentioned in the presentation, the world of sourcing has evolved from the west to the east, and over the past 100 years, and during those 100 years, standards have changed, trends have come up, and we've been sort of in the forefront of keeping up to date with all of these trends. I think as the sourcing evolves from country to country, as standards evolve from compliance, social compliance, to environmental compliance, to sustainability, and now worker safety. I think one thing that is very important to note is that what stays constant is really how we feel as a human being living in this world. How do we feel about sustainability? How does that transform into your day-to-day work? How do you not get sort of confused about making profits and being sustainable and being a citizen of the world? I also mentioned that the world is becoming more and more transparent. The old days of living in the gray area is no longer sustainable, and it has to change.
Right.
I think if you ask your children, who are what I call the millennials, they live in a truly transparent world.
Right.
In that world, there are no hidden secrets. There are no waiting to get things done and getting factories compliant. It's either now, or you have, or you don't even have a business.
Yep. And you keyed on some important things, and that's responsibility. And as a global organization, Li & Fung is taking their place of being a responsible sourcing agent for so many brands. But also, personally, we need to have an effect on that and moving ahead responsibly, socially, ethically, with the greening of our supply chain, ensuring that our factories are doing their best as well. And it just kind of ripples all the way down. In the end, the consumer is the one. And so
it's not just evolution, but it's also growth and expansion. So we have to continue to grow also.
Yeah,
So
certainly.
Yep. And so as you see Li and Feng growing further, what do you feel that there's anything that is going to be a tremendous hurdle that for your organization, and what are you looking at to, what are your new initiatives from a group side?
Sure. I think as we move forward, I don't see any major hurdles for us to reach to the next stage. I think, earlier when I talked about transparency, I think the world basically has to face the reality and face the music. And this is something that, I think maybe in our generation is something new, but in the newer generation, this is just a way of life.
Right.
And I think being the leader of a global organization, we have to realize that the world has changed, and we have to quickly change with it. And I don't see any major hurdles to moving forward in where we want to take the world of sourcing and sustainability. It's just a matter of time.
Right. And once again, Spencer, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the position as a responsible leader in our industry.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye bye.